Hello, Happy New Year. Last time I talked to you, I had moved. Now that I'm talking to you a year later, I've moved again. But you wouldn't necessarily know because the background is the same. The shelves are here, they're intact. I read some amazing books in 2023 that I wanted to talk about. This is gonna be my top 10 reads. It's a little more than a top 10 because some are like, they go together. It was such a good year, so many good books. These aren't even necessarily like 2023 releases, plenty are, but I just wanted to get into it on where my reading has been. And rather than going backwards, I wanted to start with my favorite book of the year, which was Open Throat by Henry Hoke. I admittedly picked this up because of the title and what I thought it meant, and I think that is like part of the marketing decision here. I walked into Book Soup and I was like, oh, interesting. It's narrated by a queer mountain lion living in the Hollywood Hills. It's so sad, so cute. Oh my God. This is the kind of book that you can read in 5 minutes. And by 5 minutes, I mean like 2 days. I was just so blown away the entire time I was reading this about how creative the storytelling was, the perspective, and the writing looks like this. So it's like the thoughts of this mountain lion. And for a while, we're just hanging out with him, and it is a pleasure to do that. Like, I could have done that the entire book, but then something happens. He obviously lives in LA, and as the narrator, he spells it like LA, and he hears people walking by talking about living in scarcity, but he thinks it's scare city. There are just pieces of it like that that stay with me. This is the kind of book that I know I could read so many times and get something new out of it every time. I'm glad that I read it on my Kindle first and highlighted the hell out of it. The next book I absolutely loved this year is The Shards by Bret, Easton, Ellis. This is one of the last books I read of the year, so it's still very fresh in my mind. Also has a lot underlined in here. It's almost 600 pages, but I flew through it and did not want it to stop. Like, I slowed myself down reading this to make it last longer. I didn't even know it was gay when someone like thrust it into my hands and said, you have to read this. I was like, okay, I trust this person. And I've never read anything from Bret Easton Ellis before, American Psycho or Less Than Zero. Like, I was not in on any of this. The main character is Bret Ellis, the author, and he sets it up as him in his 50s, like recalling what happened to him in high school with this serial killer. And it follows him and his group of friends and his slow descent into madness, trying to figure out what is going on, and also his like sex life, his friend life. It's written so well. Every chapter feels like an episode of television, and it just keeps going. It is so fleshed out. It is just like another book I feel like I could read over and over. It was like the longest book I read all year too, but it does not feel like it at all. I feel like I still need to process and like talk to someone about what happened at the end of this book. Number 3 on my list is Only This Beautiful Moment by Abdi Nazemian. Oh my God, I read this as an ARC last January. Abdi's one of my favorite authors, favorite YA authors especially. Like, I've read his last 3 books. Like a Love Story is an all-time favorite. I have put copies of that book in so many people's hands. This book follows 3 generations of Iranian men, a grandfather, a father, and then Maud. The grandpa and the son are both gay. The son is like an openly gay guy living in 2019, finds out his grandpa is dying and travels to visit him and starts learning about his history. And so the 3 storylines interweave beautifully, but also hold their own as like 3 separate stories that you're following. I was getting lost in all of them, and it made the book just fly by. I miss the experience of reading this book. I don't read a ton of YA anymore, really, but when it feels like this, it's like, this is why, like, I will still come back, like, when it's just done this well. Next on my list, I read 3 books this year, probably the big 3 by Melissa Broder. I read Milk Fed, The Pisces, and her book that came out this year called Death Valley. I remember thinking at the time that Death Valley was probably the best one, but now looking back, I kind of think Milk Fed stands out as my favorite. The Pisces is the only one I have a hard copy of because I gave Milk Fed to like a situationship, rest in peace. And then Death Valley I read as an ARC on my Kindle. So like, this is all we got. I adore Melissa Broder's writing so much. When I was feeling stuck this year, I would pick up the next book by her that I could. Her writing is so funny and insightful and just like jarring in like a brutally honest way. Milk Fed deals with eating disorders in a very stark, honest, shocking way. The sexual content in these books is like, it's giving HBO Max original comedy. All of her narrators who feel like a version of the same person in a good way, except Death Valley really does feel like her. It's extremely personal. The voice is just dry. These books are so fun to read, but also packed with like one-liners that are like, whew, my God. Next up, I read this little duology called The Idiot by Elif Batuman. It's The Idiot and Either Or. This follows our narrator's first and second year at Harvard. It is quite dense, but the voice is just priceless. It's so good. You know when you go to a movie and you leave feeling like the main character and you kind of like embody that energy? This is how I felt after reading this book, and during it I felt like I was thinking like the main character and observing life in that way, and that doesn't always happen with books in the same way. The voice was just so strong. Not a lot happens in a lot of pages. Like, she's kind of walking around for a while and then there is a point where like we get somewhere, but the journey of just getting there is so fun. Like, it's just fun to live in that voice. She's also experiencing a year of college, which is, you know, bound to be a fraught time emotionally and in every other way, and it just like zaps you into that mode. Email is new, like this is set in the 90s. There are a lot of funny things that happen in that way, and it's just so smart. So I was shocked when I actually even liked the second one even more. There is a through line of this one where she's reading this book Either Or, and the place that she gets to at the end, which I'm actually realizing in this moment is really beautifully like illustrated on this cover. But the last few pages of this book hit me emotionally. It left me with a whole different appreciation of like how much of a genius Elif Batuman is. I would read an entire series of all of her years at Harvard. These books are so intense, but so like joyful and propulsive. So good. Next up, I finally read The Hours by Michael Cunningham. I loved this book. I read this almost entirely on a flight. I've been meaning to read it forever. I still haven't watched the movie. And I'm almost done right now with Day by Michael Cunningham, his book that came out this past year. This book I really, really enjoyed. Oh my God. This book feels like lightning in a bottle, and another case where the last few pages seal the deal and assure you that this is an absolute masterpiece. I feel like there's not a ton I could say about the story. I'm not gonna attempt to like put it in my own words, but this is just one of those books that gets you excited about storytelling and books in general. Like, only a book could have done this. It's just so gorgeous. I'm so grateful that I read this book. Next up, I want to talk about Edinburgh by Alexander Chee. I read this for a masterclass that I got to be part of this year, and I'm so glad I finally read it. I had only read Alexander Chee's collection of essays, How to Write an Autobiographical Novel, which I also adored, and so this was my first time reading his fiction. This was a really beautiful story too, and also plays with perspective in a very unique way. It deals with pretty intense subject matter and follows our main character from when he is a child and then flashing forward to a much later time in his life when he is a teacher. There's this dreamlike quality to Alexander Chee's writing that I really appreciate it. It's a very risky book. Like, you're sort of on the edge of your seat because it's like, where is this story gonna go and where is the writing gonna take us in the mind of these narrators. It is very intense and fearless in that way. So many passages in this book that just took my breath away. It's a story of sexual abuse, and so we're following this child at the beginning, and then we see how the abuse has manifested itself into the main character years later. And I mean, what I just said is just scratching the surface of where this goes. Like, it is quite a journey. I feel like I came to it when I was ready to read a story like this, and this book really means a lot to me. I am so glad I read it this year. The next book I have on my list is I Have Some Questions for You by Rebecca Makkai. This is my second Rebecca Makkai reading experience. The first one was The Great Believers, which is sort of a Chicago AIDS queer book. That's definitely generalizing it quite a bit, but that's what it is. And I really, really love The Great Believers. So I was so excited to read this one. It follows this film and like podcasting professor who ends up going back to her alma mater to teach, and it awakens all of these memories and pieces of evidence of a murder that took place while she was there. And her students start to take an interest in this as well. And so all of this sort of becomes unavoidable. It leads her down several paths that she can't ignore anymore. Of course, in the nature of Rebecca Mackai's storytelling, like, things are interwoven so beautifully. Things in her personal life start to take a dip. I mean, I wouldn't even know where to get into. I feel like I keep saying that, like, what am I even doing here? But this book raises a lot of questions. It's about memory and reckoning with the past, seeing things in a new light because you are older and also because the world is different. The way that, you know, things start to hit you later in life, like, that happens to all of us. And especially when it is around a topic like this, I thought Rebecca Makkai walked the line of like a protagonist could tackle this issue in a way that was like understandable for a reader. I liked this book a lot. The next book I want to talk about is Romantic Comedy by Curtis Sittenfeld. Curtis Sittenfeld is like a very well-known celebrated author, and I feel like I chose a very strange first reading experience of hers for me. Not strange because the book is strange, but strange because like the rest of them sound strange, and this one is like a pretty cut and dry rom-com. I read it very quickly because I was in this very living room, which you can't see, but I had just moved. It was the summer and I was unpacking boxes, and so I needed to just like put in an audiobook and focus for hours and hours, and this book got me through, and I missed the characters so much. I feel like they were hanging out with me that day, and it was a good book for me to do that. Like, I chose well. I read that and Yellowface. Yellowface I also enjoyed, but it's not on this list. But Romantic Comedy follows this writer who works at a show that's basically SNL, so she's a comedy writer, and she basically falls in love with the musical guest. And that is it. That is the short. It is a very well done rom-com. It was scratching the Emily Henry itch for me, honestly, because I've not been vibing with her recent books. I love Emily Henry so much, but I struggled with Happy Place. I struggled with Book Lovers. So this was like taking me to that place that I was wanting. I'll read like one straight love story a year, and this was it for me, and it was delightful. The final book I want to talk about, this is sort of a cop-out choice for me because this was actually my third time reading it, and it's a classic. I wanted to talk about Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin. I also read this for a class this year, and so I saw it in a whole new light. I read it like very closely. I was underlining things, and so rather than taking in the story this time, I really was so focused on the writing and had a whole new appreciation for James Baldwin by the end of it. And the next time I read it, I know that I will have all of these underlines. I don't know if you can even see, but this is like now my special copy that I have torn up and marked the hell out of. Reading this was such a highlight of my reading year, so I couldn't not include it in a video like this. And those are my top 10 reads of 2023. If you've read any of those and have any thoughts, I would love to hear them in the comments. I'd love to hear what your favorite books of the year were. What are you looking forward to most in 2024? This was really fun to do. Thank you for watching. My name is Tiernan. I will see you somewhere around sometime. I don't know. Have a good one. Happy New Year still. Goodbye.